Karate to friends, subscribers, and my first Patreon subscriber. Thank you so much to Gabriel. Welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. My name is Mark Graves, and today I'm going to be talking about sexbots in ancient Greece. So a great book on this is called Gods and Robots by Adrienne. If you haven't already read that, it's amazing. She goes through all kinds of stories about robots, but also just technology in ancient Greece. Definitely recommend. I would show you my copy, but I had to return it. I'm probably going to have to buy it here soon. So she goes through all that. I'm just going to be doing a piece of that, basically the sexbots that she talks about. And I should first mention that she acknowledges that there was no term. They didn't have the word robot in the ancient world. They didn't really have that concept, so we can't just map that onto them. We can't just assume that they thought about it the same way that we do, or that it was the same thing. But clearly there are statues and mechanical things that look like humans that can move, talk, be interacted with, maybe even think. So even if it's not exactly our idea of a modern robot, it's pretty close and it's worth talking about. So the first example of this is somewhat obvious. You may have heard this story already, but it is of Galatea. So this is the myth of Pygmalion. This is where we get the play Pygmalion and then later the movie My Fair Lady from. One of my favorites. So the original Greek myth is actually quite creepy. So there's this man named Pygmalion, and he's very frustrated with all the women around him. He doesn't think any of them are good enough, none of them are pure enough. So he decides to create his own. He makes this statue of his perfect, beautiful woman. And over time, he slowly falls in love with this statue, although love may be the wrong word. It may just be lust here, but he does bring her little gifts and presents and jewelry. He dresses her up in different outfits. It gets to be quite sad. So eventually, it's the festival of Aphrodite, and he goes to her temple, and he says his little prayer to himself. And he's nervous to ask what he really wants to ask, that the statue will come alive. So he just asks Aphrodite that he can have a wife that is as much like his statue lady girlfriend as possible. So Aphrodite knows what's up, and she grants that the statue comes to life. And he goes home, and as Ovid tells us, he starts right away handling her and kind of starting to have sex with her. And it describes as he's handling the ivory that she's made out of, it starts to warm and kind of shape under his fingers. And then as she's sort of coming to life, the first thing she sees is his face as he's having sex with her. So it's very strange. And it's unclear if she is a living statue or if she's become a full human at this point, but she is able to have a child with him, so maybe, but it's definitely a weird, definitely a strange, but very fascinating story. Next up is Aphrodite of Knidos. So this is a statue by a fellow named Praxiteles in the 4th century BC. So allegedly this is the first statue of a nude woman in Greece. So it was quite a sensation. And it was apparently modeled off this gal named Phryne. She was the model for this statue, and she was a famous prostitute. But she was very wealthy and successful. So there's stories of her offering to fund buildings if they'll put her name on it because she had so much money. There's a story of her being called to trial for indecency, and apparently the prosecuting, or her defense lawyer basically pulled aside her clothing so that the jury could see her breasts, and after that they all acquitted her. So she's quite a character, great story from the ancient world, and she was the model for this statue that was put in this temple of Aphrodite. And it wasn't actually alive or moving at all. It didn't have any moving parts as far as I know, but it was famous for being extremely lifelike. And there are stories of this kind of statue by this sculptor and by others at this time, confusing animals and just being crazy, unsettlingly realistic. And apparently they had a problem of men sneaking into the temple and staying there after hours and then ejaculating on the statue. And they would find the stains afterwards, and it was a big problem that they had to deal with. So again, it's not exactly a sex robot, but it's sort of sadly and humorously quite similar. Next is Pandora, which I'm sure you've heard of, but Mayer's book had some details that I wasn't aware of, so I'm going to share some of those with you. So, of course, Pandora is this female thing, maybe a woman, that the gods create, and they give to Epimetheus, who's the brother of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, to try to punish both Prometheus and humans. So Epimetheus accepts Pandora because she's so hot, and then her box that the gods give her ends up being opened, and it causes chaos. What I did not know is that in portrayals of Pandora, she's almost always portrayed on vase paintings facing forward, which is reserved for people who are dead or for statues. So if you're portraying a living person or god or something, they're almost always going to be profile, but she's portrayed facing straight on, and she has like this weird just stare and this little creepy smile. It's really creepy, actually, now that it's been pointed out to me and I notice it. Now, I have heard stories from, I have one professor who is very defensive of Pandora and says that actually she was, in some sense, the ideal woman, and the gods were counting on her fulfilling her job of taking care of the food storage and all that, and they were counting on her being a good woman. And then, of course, there's the story that she was an evil fembot who was out to get humanity. So it's up to you, believe what you want to believe, but that's very interesting that she is portrayed in this way that's not quite human, that is a little robotic, and that again, she's using her sexuality, or the gods, I guess, are using her sexuality to influence and seduce men. Next is the story of Laodamia. So she was the wife of a Trojan soldier named Protesilaus. Anyway, he died in the Trojan War. Very sad. But apparently before he left, he had not gotten to consummate their marriage, so the gods allow him to return to the living, actually, for 3 days, and then he has to go back to the underworld for them to and then after this, she's so distraught that she commissions a bronze replica of her husband to be made, and she keeps it in her bedroom. And at one point, her servants, one of the servants in the house, spies her making out with this statue, and he doesn't realize it's a statue. He thinks she's just making out with some random guy, and he's, disturbed by this, so he goes and tells her father, and he rushes it, and he sees that she's making out with a statue, and he's like, "Oh, sweetie." So he takes the statue away and he's like, "We're gonna burn this in the fire. You need to get over this, move on." And she's so distraught that she actually throws herself onto the fire and dies. So it's quite a sad story, but it's a very interesting example, actually, of a woman being seduced by a sexbot or what have you. Thank you so much for checking out this video on Sexbots. I hope to see you again next week. So school has started for me again. I'm teaching Latin, and I'm also taking a few seminars myself. But the plan is to keep these coming for you. So thank you so much for your support. And good luck to any of you that are also heading back to school right about now. I hope to see you in Galatea.